Welcome to EVONA Origin Stories, the space podcast where we look to bring you extraordinary leaders from within the sector and their fascinating stories of early life, career, and how they broke into the space industry.
Today we are joined by visionary space architect and the CEO and founder of Ziso, Michal Ziso. After growing up in Israel, she moved to New York aged 12, where her love for diversity, buildings and architecture blossomed. When she turned 18, she went on to join the Israeli Intelligence Corps, where she began learning about space, satellites and communication. Michal moved on to the exciting world of space architecture when she found herself, by absolute chance, involved in a competition to design a settlement on Mars. Here, her love for space was ignited, and she began thinking about how to use space as a way to innovate and design equality-driven architecture. This was the catalyst for an incredible career as a space architect, which we're very excited to be diving into today.
Hi, Mika. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I am very well, thank you. Really looking forward to speaking with you today. Thank you for joining me. I'd love to sort of jump straight into it, if that's okay.
Of course.
Fantastic. So I think, the reason we call this podcast EVONA Origin Stories is we like to sort of dive into people's stories, understand their roots into the industry, and hopefully inspire people to join the space sector. So we'd like to sort of start back from the early days of Mika. Talk us through where you started in life, where you grew up, school, college, and your early experience at Israeli Intelligence Corps.
Yeah, well, I had quite an interesting upbringing. I was born in Haifa, Israel, which is a city in the north of Israel. And when I was 12 years old, my whole family actually moved to New York City. And there I studied at a school that's called Dwight on the Upper West Side. And it was a school of kids who are children of envoys and diplomats from all over the world. So from a very, very early age, I got exposed to many different types of people and cultures. And that kind of really influenced the way I think today. And I'm assuming we'll get to it later on, but that was an interesting point in my childhood. And then when we were living in the US, my parents used to take my brother and I around the US to travel and to see a lot of amazing nature. And I used to tell them all the time that it's not exciting enough and they should take me to see a city. And that's kind of like me as a 12 or 13-year-old knowing or feeling that I'm attracted to buildings and architecture and these types of things. And I knew then already that it excited me. And then when we moved back when I was 16, and I was here for a few more years. And then I joined the military in Israel. It's mandatory. And I was lucky enough, I was scouted when I was 17 years old. And I did a lot of tests and stuff. And I was scouted to join the Intelligence Corps. And there it was my very first experience or encounter with space, actually, because I learned all about satellites and how and about communication in general. And I can't say much about my time there, but I was there for 2 years. And it also the unit that I was specifically at, it's one of the biggest units in the IDF. It's called 8200. And I don't know if you know, but Israel is known as the startup nation. We have the most startups per capita compared to anywhere else in the world. And a lot of these startups are founded by entrepreneurs who were at 8200 in their military service. So that's kind of all ties in. And then I was here in Israel. I studied architecture, regular with gravity architecture. I even went to study for 6 months in Milan, Italy, which was amazing as well. And that's what I did in the early days of my career, never ever thinking that there is something even called space architecture.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Awesome. No, thank you for the background. It's definitely, really interesting to hear, how you sort of moved into that sort of early career in architecture. Do you feel there was a moment for you that sort of stemmed that passion? You mentioned you sort of relocated to New York. Do you think that sort of, enlightened that passion for architecture for you?
The New York part enlightened the passion for architecture, definitely, but also a new or a different kind of understanding that, I mean, since I was 12 years old, I traveled back and forth from New York to Israel. It's a 12-hour flight by myself or with my younger brother. And from very, very early on, I started to feel like the world is kind of small, or that it's not too big for whatever I want to do. And I think New York impacted me in the way that I really was exposed to diversity. It really opened me up to be curious about how other people experience the world, and I think that's the biggest impact.
Yeah, amazing. No, definitely. I think it's that sort of travel perspective as well as ultimately that bigger picture, that space perspective, isn't it? Looking down from above and kind of seeing the globe and feeling that you are a small part of that.
Exactly, and to learn that from a very young age, it's kind of changes the course of your life, and you really get to think about Earth as one unit and not like and a small one at that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what sort of came next for you then? How did you sort of continue in your career in architecture after your studies?
So I studied architecture in Israel for 5 years. And around the world, it's considered master's. Only in Israel, it's bachelor's degree, but equivalent to master's. And then I joined. I looked for the biggest projects. I thought that from big I can understand small, but it doesn't work the other way around. So I specialize in skyscrapers, which for me are like gigantic puzzles. They were super interesting to understand. And that's what I did for 5 years here in Israel. I worked at an office called Moshetzu. They are the second largest architecture firm in Israel. And I got to work on amazing skyscrapers. And then after 5 years here, I moved back to New York. And because I wanted to just, one, I promised my younger self that I'll go back as an adult. And two, I wanted to be an architect in the place where they build the biggest skyscrapers. So I was there and I worked as a senior architect and got actually to design the conceptual stages of an 80-story building on Fifth Avenue, which was very, very exciting. And I really got to experience a lot of amazing projects and teams. But the thing is, when I was there, I kind of started to notice that even though there are a lot of women architects, whenever I worked on these large scale projects, I was usually the only woman in the room. Whether it's with the developers or the consultants or decision makers, and it kind of made me start looking at the world around me from a different perspective. Started to make me kind of question if there is a relationship between how we experience our world and our environment, whether it's our cities, our neighborhoods, our buildings, our apartments, our homes, and the people behind it actually designing or paying or developing these structures. And I found out that there is there is a big connection there, and that kind of steered me in a new direction, that I decided to move back to Israel, open my own firm, and focus on that, on the relationship between architecture and the built environment, to diversity and equity, and how different people use the environment, and how are they being hurt by design that is not designed for them. And I can talk a lot more about it, so stop me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, definitely. And that's something I'm really keen to kind of talk in more detail about. I think, also for us, one of the big motives of us starting this podcast is to try to make space accessible for everyone. And, one of the hot topics across not just space, but STEM at the moment is diversity. So yeah, certainly want to kind of hear what your thoughts are on, diversity in space and also other industries. You mentioned, architecture being an area for you where you felt that was a big focus when you were, initially joined.
Yeah, so I that was the thing. I started to look around me here on Earth and start to see a lot of examples of discrimination by design. The problem was that it is really, really hard to change things, to change how things are being done, to change things that are already built, to change infrastructure, to change ideas, to change how people think. People don't even notice that our environment is not necessarily built for us. We don't notice that our environment may slow us down, may be dangerous for us, and may prevent us from living our best lives. So from there, I kind of stumbled by complete chance on a competition to design a conceptual competition to design a settlement on Mars. And I decided to use, that was the first time in my career that I made the choice to use space, and specifically Mars, as a playground or as an experiment lab into how we can design, when we have a chance to design from scratch, equality-driven architecture that takes into consideration multiple types or diverse people and users. And I really didn't know how that will look like, but that was the first time that I said, okay, we have a unique chance here. And later on, when I got into the industry, I learned that one, it is also not as diverse as I would like it to be. And two, that there is a unique chance here to really do things differently and learn from mistakes, and also use space as an innovation tool to prove that if we design things a certain way, we can bring those ideas back here to Earth.
Yeah, amazing. So not wanting to sort of move around too much, but you mentioned there, your kind of, I guess, entry into space and the competition that you were involved in. So yeah, could you tell us a little bit more about that? How did you ultimately end up, moving into space architecture?
Yeah, so I mean, I really think that I never was into space. I know it's an odd thing to say. I know that a lot of people in the industry were fascinated by space and astronauts ever since they were young, and I was not like that. I never watched Star Wars. I never watched sci-fi anything, or never read any books, and it was really not in my sphere of things that I took interest in. And once I started to do that competition, it was the very first time I started to learn about space by myself. And I got really excited because I saw that the fact that in space, it's kind of like a video game where you have different worlds and each world have a different condition or a different set of conditions and kind of rules. And you can reinvent yourself and reinvent anything that like our building blocks. And I got really excited about that. And I ended up not winning anything in that competition. And that should be a lesson that sometimes even when you don't win, you can still manifest it into a whole entire new career. So what happened was that I applied with all the insight that I got from that competition to do a TED Talk. And I forgot about it. And a few months later, I got accepted. And I was lucky enough to stand in front of 1,600 people, which was the very first time that I ever did any form of public speaking, and talk about that. And also talk about and connect it to the experience in New York and to the experience as an architect in New York and the situation on Earth and how I started to view space as a way to do things differently, to think differently, to innovate. And then the ball kind of started to roll from there in a way that I never predicted. And I got accepted. I decided that I wanted to open up a social venture that was called Mars is More. in architecture, we have less is more. It's a term coined by Miss Van der Rohe. He was a very, very famous, amazing architect. And so Mars is more. And it was an idea to create a platform to share ideas. And I got accepted with that to an entrepreneurship kind of incubator by the Israeli Space Agency and the Ramon Foundation. And I went there, and again, I was one of two other women in a room full of like 50 guys. And I met people from the industry. I met the former NASA administrator, Mr. Charles Bolden, and I was introduced to him as a space architect. And there is nowhere in the world that you can actually study space architecture as an entire degree. There is a specific master's program in Texas, but that's about it. And so once I was introduced to him as a space architect, I was like, okay, I'll take it. That's the title. I'm gonna run with it from now on. And it kind of opened me up, and I found mentors that pushed me more than I was able to actually move. And really things started to roll from there.
I love that. I think, you touched on some really interesting points and good bits of advice there. I think definitely the you didn't win anything in that competition, but you took that as an opportunity to kind of take that, what you've learned and the information that you've gained, and actually continue on that path. I think that's such a good thing to kind of take away from that. And also you mentioned the mentors as well that you'd identified and that helped you kind of get to that next stage. So for you, what would you say that you sort of love most about the space industry?
I find that the people in the space industry are the most optimistic, positive people, for the most part, that I've ever found. I mean, it has a long way to go in terms of diversity, but it's the first time I encounter people that are not only aware of the issue, but really care about it and want to make change, and are open to new ideas. So that's amazing, to me, that there is such a big group in the world of people that are kind of, or I did later on, I was invited by the International Space University to give another TED Talk. And there I was lucky enough to talk with, alongside the Chief Innovation Officer of NASA, and also Pete Worden, who's one of the founders of New Space. And he told us, Pete Worden, he said that NASA has been paying him his salary for 40 years to find aliens. And he never did, or he never found aliens. He didn't find aliens yet, but they still continue to pay him. And he's still optimistic that he's going to find them. So that's kind of like an amazing thing to learn about an entire group of people, because I came from the construction industry. And there, unfortunately, the majority of people are only interested in profit, and less about, values and things like that, which is really, really sad, because it's not what they teach us in architecture school. They teach us about values, teach us about how to make people feel good in the spaces that we're building and creating, but that's not the reality. And in the space industry, it's completely different. But there are downsides to the industry as well, I gotta say.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you want me to go there just yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just on that, I've been involved in the space sector for almost 3 years now, and I'm still learning exciting things every day. And as you mentioned, it's got that opportunity, that enthusiasm, and a really great community. But as you mentioned, that there is a big focus on diversity. So what do you feel that we could be doing differently across the industry and at STEM level to sort of impact change now and for future generations?
Well, I think that the space industry is like it's a good way to examine a lot of things that we're doing on Earth in general. If I go back to architecture, space architecture is the epitome of sustainability, for example, because we just don't have any other choice. We don't have any other choice but to produce our own energy and oxygen and recycle as much as we can. And so on. And also in terms of diversity, space should be and has the opportunity to kind of um, be the epitome of the way things should be done right. Because, for example, so far there have been around 620 people humans in space. Out of those people, only about 11 or 12% of them have been women. About 75 women have been to space, which is less than any amount that is sufficient for any scientific actual research or study. Today, the space industry is trying to fix that by saying, okay, from now on, we're going to fly 50-50. We're going to look at everything 50-50, which is, you would think on Earth, it's amazing 50-50. But in order to fix actual issues with diversity or with lack of diversity and lack of research and lack of data, you have to fly out, I don't know, 10, 20 missions that are only female, only women. And I think there's a good chance to do that. And I think we have to understand that space is a really, really good way to kind of look at the way we live on Earth in kind of a small way, and how different changes, 2 more people, 3 more people, 5 more people can kind of really change the scale or tip the scale. And I think when we talk about outreach and STEM education, people really have to understand that there is amazing opportunities for women and also for people in general to innovate in the space industry. And it's transforming now because it's so open, and we're going towards, commercializing space. There's a need for different types of minds and professions other than, the engineers and scientists. We would need diverse people from all walks of life and from all professions, which is very exciting. So when we talk about STEM, I think these things to one, educate people about what is happening in the space industry, and to really, make them see how amazing it can be, and how much change it still requires, and how much, impact they can have personally on the industry. I think that's a really motivating thing to encourage people to get into the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you mentioned, that commercialization of space, and as the space industry continues to grow, that there's so much opportunity out there, and doesn't need to be that sort of traditional engineering background, as you mentioned. And there's lots of other opportunities across the industry. Would you be able to tell us a little bit more? I know you're involved in various different talks and groups to help kind of promote diversity within STEM and the space industry. Would you be able to talk through some of your involvement with that?
Yeah, I mean, I have to take a deep breath because there's a lot.
Yeah.
So, and actually, in the beginning of the pandemic, I joined efforts of the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs. They have an initiative called Space for Women, and it's about STEM and STEAM education and outreach, specifically aimed for younger women and girls to get into the industry. So for about a year and a half, we did weekly shows or webinars online that were global, and we were interviewing a lot of different professionals from around the world about space. So that's something that we did for a really long time, and I think it still is going on, but I'm not involved in that on that kind of tight basis anymore. But that was very, very exciting, and I love that initiative, and that initiative still exists, Space for Women, and there's Space for Women mentorship, which I encourage people to check out, because they really offer mentors one-on-one, and it's pretty great. I work closely with the Israeli Association for Women in Space. I'm one of their founding members, and we kind of gathered all women from all different professionals in Israel, and we are kind of meeting monthly and seeing how we can encourage women and girls locally to get more involved, and to help them with anything from mentorship to how to get accepted to a new job and how to be courageous enough to even apply. So I work with that. I work closely with the Ramon Foundation here in Israel, and I do a lot of talks about, like, in the Israeli Space Week and the International Space Week, mostly about space architecture in general. Sometimes it has to do with specifically with diversity. I got a scholarship from the Israeli Space Agency to study at the International Space University. And I'm paying back that scholarship with hours of volunteering in schools here in Israel for kids from the age of 12 or 13 to 18. And I give them kind of lectures about what's happening in space. And it's really, really exciting to see their reactions because, the future is for them. Whatever we are planning now for space, they will be the ones to actually potentially use it. So it's really exciting to let them know what's going on and see how they react and see their ideas. And there are a lot more other initiatives that I volunteer at and work with and collaborate with. Um, but yeah, I do a lot of public speaking and conferences and things like that also, all around the world.
Amazing. Well, thank you for highlighting that. There's some, really good resources and talks on there that you mentioned that, our listeners will be able to find and hopefully listen to, and again, inspire people to kind of join the space industry. So yeah, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing with that. So going back to sort of Ziso, I mean, could you sort of please tell our listeners a bit about what Ziso do, how they fit into the space sector, and where you see yourself and the company being in the next 5 years?
Yeah. So as I said before, when I moved back to Israel and I decided to open Ziso, the idea was to have it stand on two pillars and two core values: the architecture and the equality. But quickly enough, when I got into the industry, the space industry, I added two more pillars, which are innovation and space. So at the beginning, I was working on with gravity, let's call it on Earth architecture, and was looking for those unique projects that I can incorporate these new ideas and it was harder to find those, to be honest. And later on, I started to use Ziso as a platform, and I transformed it into an innovation and architectural lab, where we do a lot of research about space architecture and space innovation, and bringing innovation from space to Earth. So one of those researches, for example, was we mapped out different types of Earth disabilities, based on the understanding that a lot of disabilities that people have are only there because their environment is holding them back. Imagine if a person on a wheelchair was able to go anywhere, and the environment, every building, every street, every sidewalk was fit for wheelchairs. They were not disabled, they were able to do everything. So the term disabilities a lot of times is a factor of the environment. So we mapped out different types of disabilities: physical, cognitive, sensory, and we started to think about what disabilities can actually transform into space superpowers. And one of the things we found out is that if we look at astronauts on the International Space Station, they mainly use their hands to move around. They don't use their legs. So we thought, what if we take Paralympic athletes who are healthy people that may be lower limb amputees? They don't have legs, so they would weigh less. It will be easier to fly them out to space. They don't need their legs, so they'll be able to move around like everybody else. And astronauts have to train 2 hours a day, every day, to maintain their bone density and their muscles. So since they have less bones and less muscles, they will not have to train as much, maybe. And every hour of an astronaut is estimated at about $500,000. So if we can save even 30 minutes of working out, we can save a lot of money. And one of my interns talk to ESA about it, the European Space Agency, just to see what they have, what programs they have, and didn't have anything. But about 8 to 10 months later, after that conversation, we were happy to see that ESA opened up a para-astronaut program that they were actually looking for these exact types of people to join their astronaut program, which is very, very exciting. So that's one thing that we are doing at Ziso. And actually, these days, I have a few other titles. I'm on the advisory board of a new venture capital in Israel that invests in space tech startups that is called Moon to Mars Ventures. And also on the advisory board of a new space tech incubator called Earth and Beyond. That is an incubator by Moon to Mars, joined with the Israeli government and the Innovation Authority, which is very, very exciting. And I also have a new startup, a space tech startup that we are developing a solution for quality sleep in space. Which is very, very exciting. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, a lot of things that I'm working on today. I'm still working with CISO and continuing the research and continuing the projects, but we have a lot of other interesting things on our plate as well.
Awesome. Could you tell us a little bit more about the startup you just mentioned?
Yeah, so when I started to work more closely with big organizations in the industry, and by the way, another pointer for anyone who's trying to get into the industry, a lot of people are really, really nice. People would want to see you succeed. People would want to help. Also, if anyone is listening and would want to reach out to me, feel free. And a lot of other people in the industry are happy to set up meetings, Zoom meetings, and talk. And what I did in the past year, I actually did almost a weekly meetings with different specialists from NASA. And I started to talk to them about space architecture and all my, diversity ideas. And I learned that these agencies, because they are government agencies, they tend to work a bit slower than a startup would. And change is something that takes more time within agencies. And so I really understood that to change a big conception about how we build architecture in general and how it should look in the space industry or in space may be a little hard for me. So what I did was I broke it down to building blocks. I said, okay, in space, we have to reinvent all our very, very basic things that we do. Reinvent how we breathe, reinvent how we eat, how we drink, and also how we sleep. And if we think about it, if we don't sleep well, we don't function well. So sleep is a big risk to mission success. So I decided to incorporate ideas of human-centered design into a product or solution that kind of rethinks how we should sleep in space. And the main things that I tackled was privacy, especially from looking at diversity. If there's only 1 or 2 female astronauts on board with 10 male astronauts, it's a different thing than if there are 12 male astronauts sleeping in the same kind of working space in a sleeping bag with their heads exposed. So that kind of was my starting point. And that's what we are developing today. And we are looking into Earth applications and seeing which Earth applications can benefit from this space innovation. And I know we don't have a lot of time left, so I will not go into more detail, but it is called The Sleep, our website. We have like a very, very, initial website. It's called thesleep.space, so people can check it out. And yeah, so that's something that we are excited to continue on and develop.
Yeah, that sounds like a very, very exciting business, and looking forward to seeing how things progress. And we'll certainly check out the website as well. So yeah, thanks for giving us a bit more insight into that. And to kind of finish things off, Mika, I mean, in terms of advice, what advice would you have for anyone looking to enter into the space sector in 2022 and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, I think this advice goes for any sector, but in the space sector specifically, network like your life depends on. I think that you should take advantage of the fact that people are so awesome and nice and positive in this sector. And just really, this is something that I did without understanding that that's what I did. When I got into the industry, I didn't know what I wanted to actually do. I didn't have a specific ask from people. But what I did was I networked, and I met a lot of people, and I made sure to meet them for coffee, meet them for a Zoom chat, follow up on those meetings, send them things that I thought that they would like, and just kept those or made that network bigger and bigger. And today, for example, with my startup, when I need connections, when I need funding, when I need collaborations, I have a lot of people that I can turn to that can either help me or point me in the right direction. So I think networking is something that is very, very impactful in this industry that you can do, because space industry is still not that big of an industry compared to other industries, and a lot of people know each other, especially if you go to the International Space University, which I recommend. And then you find that a lot of people all over the world have been there or know people that study there, and it's very, very exciting to learn that and to use that network. So I think that's something that could be very useful. And another thing is, a lot of people told me 3 years back or 4 years back that it's too early to talk about space architecture. And I was always like, no, we're too late. We have to talk about space architecture now. We had to start talking about it 10 years ago. And I kept on pushing, and I didn't listen. And I was right. And it kind of pays off now. So even if you have crazy ideas about space and things that nobody ever thought about until now, don't be discouraged if it's a little bit harder, because a lot of things that when we talk about innovation in space specifically, it's the pinnacle of futurism. And of course, you may have new ideas that nobody else thought about before. So you should be confident enough to push and not necessarily listen to people that are telling you that there's no room for that, it's too early, that's too much, it's too big of an idea. So trust your gut on that one.
I love that. Some amazing bits of advice there. I think, networking is certainly something that a lot of our guests say on the show. And I think, as you said, it's invaluable. As there's lots of kind of online courses or conversations and talks that you can sign up to and help expand your network, virtually as well as in person. And I've said, sort of think big, don't be discouraged, and, continue with your passion.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, for example, my websites, the Ziso, both of my companies, Ziso and The Sleep, the website starts with the Ziso is theziso.com, Sleep is thesleep.space. And if you don't, that's kind of something that I did myself on my own. And I thought, if I'm not going to give the credit to myself first and call it the Ziso or the Sleep, nobody else will. So I think, it qualifies for any sector. Really be confident to do you, and go for your dreams, and also be confident that you will make mistakes. But that network that we mentioned before will be the thing that will save you. You should always know that if you don't know the answer, you will have people to turn to that will have those answers and will be able to help you out.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mika. I could honestly carry on talking to you for hours. So thank you so much for all your insights. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Hopefully speak to you soon. Thank you.
Bye.